back with this is
Okay.
versus 0.
Okay,
Decided after 5 because
so this is the 6th session, and for me, these are the most important books, because these are the books that I call early recognition, where Penelope supposedly recognizes the beggar. Now, up to 1950, that wasn't the case. But somebody wrote an article, I think, P.W. Harsh was his name, wrote an article in 1950, suggested that in Book 19, Penelope, when she interviews the beggar Odysseus, recognizes him. And since that time, scholars took it up, and they've been looking all over the Odyssey to show that recognition really occurs before that. And there's one scholar from Cambridge that puts it in Book 14, that they know who he is by Book 14. But the classic idea thus far is 19. And I think this came about because in the 60s there was this emphasis on new criticism, where you look at the text very closely and read the words. And then after new criticism came all this emphasis on linguistics with Derrida, with Saussure, with Lacan, French philosophers that emphasized language. And more now pretty much, except a few diehards, most people, most scholars believe that by 19, Penelope does know who the beggar is, and so does Eumaeus, the swineherd. Telemachus, of course, is told by the beggar who he is. So everything points in this case that we know that the beggar is Odysseus. And if you take that as a starting point, it makes reading the Odyssey very interesting, the way things are being said, the way people look at each other, the way they laugh. There's not too much laughter in the Odyssey, but in these books there's a lot of laughter. There's sneezing, only one sneeze, which means a lot in Greek, because even today in modern Greek, when you sneeze, it means you're going to have company. Good company. And that's what happens in the Odyssey. Telemachus sneezes, and Penelope knows that something good is coming. So we have all of that. That's why these are interesting. So we start with 17. These plates, by the way, is by a famous Greek painter called Theophilus, a primitivist who worked in the early part of the 20th century and did these drawings to make a living. He was very poor, and mostly he drew on walls. So he would go into a shop, a bakery, and say, I'll put a mural up if you could give me some bread or lunch, etc. And if you go to the island of Lesbos, you can see all these murals still in the town that he worked. And they've been collected into a very nice book by the Commerce Bank of Greece. And so I used them here. And this one, this is Homer reading the Odyssey to some fans. It says here that he's reading. So I took these from that particular book. So in Book 17, what you have mostly is a lot of forebodings, predictions, and prophecies. And I divide the book into 3 parts, and you can see here, this is a pretty popular division, 3 parts. There are many books divided into 3 parts. And these divisions are my own. Somebody else could divide it differently. But I find this helpful. So the first part is Telemachus and Penelope, where the emphasis is on Telemachus, takes up 30% of the book. The second part, the larger, is emphasizing Odysseus. And the third part, you go back to Telemachus and Penelope, where Penelope is given emphasis. And these are the things here that in Book 17 that I find of interest. We start out with Penelope, wanting to know what Telemachus found out on his journey to see Menelaus and Nestor. But the interesting thing is he doesn't really say very much to his mother at this point. But she's already wondering. She's saying, what did he find out, and why does he have this stranger with him? The stranger is Theoclemenus, who is a prophet. So she knows that he's around. She doesn't know who he is, but she's thinking now, something is going on here. Why did he bring this man back? And once Telemachus comes to the palace, and his mother keeps asking, he finally volunteers to tell her a few things that Menelaus told him, which are interesting for the reader, because you have to keep in mind what Menelaus said way back in Book 4. And what he had said in Book 4, while Telemachus was visiting him, was that Odysseus is going to return, and he used a simile, which was a lion simile, that just like the deer and her fawns went into a lair of a lion unknowingly and were eaten up when the lion returned, so will Odysseus come back as a lion to get rid of all these fawns who are the suitors, etc. So now Telemachus gives this simile to his mother. He says, this is what Menelaus told me, that he knows something about the return of Odysseus. And when you put all this together, what Menelaus said, the fact that this stranger is around, she's starting to think, who might this beggar be that has come followed by this Theoclemenus? So that's about the first 100 and so lines of this book. And at that point, you go back to Eumaeus' hut, where Odysseus and Eumaeus now leave for the city for the first time. They're going to Ithaca. So the beggar now is going to the palace. And on the way, there are some adventures. One of them is that he meets this other character, Melanthios. There are 3 herdsmen in the Odyssey. Eumaeus is the swineherd, Melanthios is the goat herd, and the last person that you'll meet in Book 20 is Philoetius, who is the ox herd. And you know about these people. They're worked up because Eumaeus and the third person, Philoetius, are going to be on the side of Odysseus. They're going to gain his confidence. They're going to help him get rid of the suitors. Melanthius is the bad guy. And Homer works him up here, tells us how horrible he is, so that when his punishment comes at the end, you won't be surprised. And the punishment is very severe. He has his ears cut off and his nose cut off and all kinds of things. But he deserves it after you read these things. So after that, Odysseus goes into the palace begging. He's a beggar. And he meets various things, people and animals. The first thing he comes across is his dog Argos, who has been neglected for all this time, 20 years. And he's found on a heap of excrement, just dying. And the moment he senses Odysseus near him, his ears prick up, he stands up, and he dies. So it becomes a symbol of what has happened to Ithaca during this time that Odysseus has been absent. It also says something about slavery, which is an important topic throughout the Odyssey, that once the master is gone, the slaves have to suffer for it. Eumaeus talks about this all the time. He says at one point he misses Odysseus because he was promised a house and a wife, and now that the master is gone, he's without a wife, he's without anything. So there, Odysseus continues begging, and you have the third big lie. There are many lies, but these are major lies, to the main suitor, Antinous. And Antinous gets so upset at this beggar who seems to talk when he should be talking and seems to be more intelligent than most, that he throws a footstool and hits him on the shoulder. Now this is important because this is going to happen 3 times. In this book, Antinous throws a footstool. In the following book, in 18, the second suitor in command, Eurymachus, is going to throw a footstool that's going to miss Odysseus, but hit the servant's hand, and he drops the food. In book 20, another suitor by the name of Ctesippus is going to throw an ox hoof, but he's going to miss completely everybody and hit the wall, which kind of shows you the diminishing power of the suitors as we go throughout the Odyssey. They start out very strong and all, but it's diminished as we go on. But the important part of this book, I think, are these last 3 things that I have here. Penelope asks to see the beggar. Now, when you read the Odyssey, you notice that she's tired of beggars coming to the palace pretending they're Odysseus, or not pretending they're Odysseus, pretending they know Odysseus, and giving her information because they want money, or they want food, or they want clothing. So they make up stories, and she doesn't want to see anybody anymore. But for some reason, this beggar impresses her, especially because Eumaeus tells her what kind of person he seems to be. It's interesting that I think in this particular book, it's 17, he really builds him up. Yeah. He uses a simile. He says this is in line 518 in book 17. But as when a man looks to a singer who has been given from the gods the skill with which he sings for delight of mortals, and they are impassioned and strained to hear it when he sings to them, so he enchanted me in the halls as he sat beside me. Because Eumaeus says, this beggar was with me 3 nights, I had him with me, and for 3 days I detained him in my shelter. And he listened to his story. So this is a special kind of beggar. So Penelope says, well, let me talk to him. Go and tell him to come and see me so we can talk. And she uses a word that Lattimore here translates as tell him to come. The Greek word is ercheo, which means to come, but it has a much deeper meaning. It also means to order, to command. So you can say, I command him to come and see me. And when Eumaeus goes to the beggar, he says, tell her that I can't come now, that it's not the right time. I'll see her in the evening, which is unusual. Why would a beggar say this to a queen who orders him to come to her? And this happens around this place too. In line 560, Odysseus says, Eumaeus, by and by I will tell everything truly to the daughter of Icarius, circumspect Penelope. First, I know well about him. We have suffered the same story. Only now I'm afraid of this swarm of rough suitors whose outrageous violence goes up into the iron sky. So he says it's not an appropriate time. Tell Penelope, therefore, for all her eagerness, to wait for me in the palace until the sun has set. And when Eumaeus goes back to Penelope and tells her this, she says, the stranger's thought is not without good sense. So she realizes something, even now. This is somebody special. So that's where we leave Penelope with 17. So he's going to see her later on. Now, when you go on to 18, again, you have the three-part, as I see it, book, where Odysseus is in the Megaron, that's in the big room where all the suitors are dining, etc. Takes up 37% of the book. And then we go to Penelope, who appears before the suitors, which is also interesting. Why does she decide to appear before the suitors now? And what does she want from them? They've been after her for all this time, actually for 3 years they've been sitting around. Although Odysseus has been gone now for 20, the suitors started 3 years ago coming to the palace, asking her to make a choice and select one of them. And then we see Odysseus back, we go back to Odysseus in the Megaron. So, 18 now, we have these things going on, which I feel are important to the theme that I'm tracing here. The first thing is that a beggar, another beggar, who has been begging in the palace, is upset that a new beggar is taking his place. His name is Arneos, and the word Arneos in Greek means sheep, or it comes from the root of sheep. He is a coward, he is timid, he can be pushed around, that's why Arneos. But everybody calls him Eros, because he delivers messages for the suitors. They want something, they say, Eros, go do this and that. And that's a form of Iris, I-R-I-S, who is the messenger goddess, the goddess that does the messaging for Zeus. So that's why they call him Eros. And Eros wants the new beggar to go away. He wants to fight him. Odysseus resists this because he knows that if they fight, he's going to kill this new beggar. But he restrains himself. The suitors egg him on. They want to see, they want to be entertained. So they set up sort of a contest. Whoever wins, whoever of the two beggars wins will get a nice meal out of it. And they'll let him sit with them. So Eros is ready to fight. But the moment the old man, Odysseus, takes off his cape, everybody can see the muscles. And even though he's an old man, it's unusual that he has such muscles. And there's a saying in Greek, something like, Eros will no longer be Eros. Because in Greek, when you put an A in front of the word, Eros, I-Eros, negates that. Eros will no longer be Eros once they start. So they start fighting, and immediately Odysseus hits him, breaks his jaw, blood is coming out of the Eros' mouth, and the thing is over. So they take the beggar now, the Odysseus beggar, and he dines with them, and they wonder, who is this old man with such muscles, etc. So Penelope is around. She's in her chamber upstairs and watching some of these goings on. And again she wonders, and she goes to her son and says, why are you allowing these people to abuse this beggar? You should be a lot more careful. Now, Telemachus already knows that the beggar's his father, but he's been told not to do anything and not to say anything. So that goes on. And then Odysseus meets a suitor, Amphinomos, who is the suitor that Penelope desires the most. And he's a very polite, a nice guy. And Odysseus tries to get this suitor to leave because he knows once he starts to fight with the suitors, everybody is going to die. But the suitor doesn't pick this up. Or if he does, he feels he's too far gone to do anything. So even though Odysseus warns him, or hints at some warning, Amphinomos doesn't pick that up. But in the process, what's important is what I have here, the theme of the Odyssey. I think if you're going to look for what is the Odyssey about, I think this is where it happens. This, for me, is what the Odyssey is all about. And this is what Odysseus tells this suitor. Of all creatures that breathe, why is that? I always get messages up here. Of all creatures that breathe and walk on the earth, there is nothing more helpless than man is. Of all that the earth fosters, for he thinks that he will never suffer misfortune in future days, while the gods grant him courage, and his knees have spring in them. But when the blessed gods bring sad days upon him, against his will, he must suffer it with enduring spirit. That's what you have in the Odyssey, because especially this word, tepliotithimo, in Greek, enduring spirit, appears many times, something like 32 times in the Odyssey. That you have to take what's coming, and you have to suffer through it, and nobody gets away with anything. Everybody at some point has to suffer, and you just do it with enduring spirit. So if you have to have a quotation about what is the Odyssey about, I think this is probably the best one. And it's just not mine. I mean, many have pointed this out. So that's why I have that there. Then you have Penelope before the suitors, which is also interesting. For the first time in the Odyssey now, she comes down from her chambers to address the suitors. And the interesting thing here to keep in mind that she never comes alone, and this is emphasized. There's always two handmaidens with her. She never appears before a crowd on her own. So there are two handmaidens, and we're given their names, and we're told on several occasions that they accompany her. So the idea is, why I mention this, when she has an interview with Odysseus, and she's sitting in the chamber in a room near a fireplace, where are these two handmaidens? Homer doesn't say. But since everywhere else they're with her, we could assume that they're probably around close by with her. So if they're close by, what do they hear? Do they hear anything? And we'll see later on. And then she asks certain questions of the suitor. She says, for example, for the first time, she says, you know, when somebody courts a lady like myself, they offer gifts. Well, why is it at this particular moment that she now demands gifts from the suitors? Why didn't she do it earlier? Or does she have something in mind? Is she recognizing something, and she's doing this because Odysseus, the beggar, later says she's very clever. She's playing the suitors now. She's using them to collect things, to collect gifts. So we see that's happening. And then we go back to the suitors who are celebrating, and the reason for that is to show the kind of people they are and why they too deserve to die, as they all will. And we're emphasizing that even though Odysseus would like to save one or two of these people, Athena, the goddess, has said, no, everybody has to die. All the suitors are going to die. All 108, with the exception of the singer. Naturally, he wouldn't kill himself, the singer, and the main servant, Medon. And we meet a few other characters that are important. Melantho is the bad maid, like Melanthios, her brother, similar names, is the bad herdsman. And we meet Eurymachus, who is the second in command, the suitors. And we get back to Telemachus, and to show that he has grown a great deal. He has matured by now. He's more authoritative. And that's important because he has to come to a point where he can now stand with his father to get rid of the suitors. He is no longer a child. And this is emphasized throughout these books. So we go to 19. Now this is the really important book because this is where the meeting occurs. The first thing that happens, 9% at the beginning of this book, which is also unusual, is the beggar says to his son, get rid of all the weapons on the wall, put them away, so that when we're ready to strike, they won't be there to be used by any of the suitors. So, all of a sudden, Penelope now sees the walls are being emptied of weapons. What's going on, she's saying to herself. Why all of a sudden they're being put away? Who's around? Who's doing this? And why is it being done? And then, after the first part of the book, we go to the important part, the second part, which is 91% of book 19, which is the meeting. And this is a very large episode. As a matter of fact, it's some 500 plus lines, which makes it almost as large as one of the books themselves. As a matter of fact, it's as large as 16 of the Odyssey books. So if you take the episode out, it's as large or larger than 16 of the 24 Odyssey books. So it's an important passage because it's so large. It has to be looked at closely. 552 lines. So you have the interview that occurs first. Then as the interview begins, you have this lie to Penelope. Remember, there was a lie to Eumaeus, a lie to Antinos, a lie to Athena, now the lie to Penelope. And after the lie and the interview is over, when Euryclea, the maid that brought Odysseus up, recognizes his scar on his thigh, that's the bath, recognizes the scar. She drops the pan when she recognizes the scar, and all of a sudden Homer digresses. So the pan is left in midair. And for another 200 or so lines, he's going to tell you about how he got the scar. And after he tells you how he got it, you go back and the pan drops. That's Bath 2. And the idea is he's telling this story, the lie and all, to Penelope, who is sitting in the room by the fireplace. The beggar has already asked that they put a chair near the fireplace for him when he interviews her, and that he turns slightly away from her. And when Penelope begins to recognize something, as we'll see, she says, let me have somebody wash your feet, which is merely hospitality. They do this. And he says, no, nobody will touch my feet. And then he says, except if you have an old woman, then I wouldn't be embarrassed if they touch. Well, he knows that the old woman around is Euryclea. She's the woman that brought him up, and she would be the one that would recognize him more than any of the others. So Penelope says, yeah, we have an old woman. We have one that brought up Odysseus as a child. He says, yes, that's good. She can wash my feet. So it seems like it's all set up for all this. So let me go to that, because this is, I think, the most interesting this is the most interesting part for me of the Odyssey. So this starts in book 19, line 96, and it goes on for a long time, goes on to the end of the book, of this book. So I'm just going to look at a few things here. Now, when they sit down for the interview, Penelope says, the first thing, stranger, I myself first have a question to ask you. What man are you and whence? Where is your city, your parents? That's not polite, remember. When we went to the Cyclops episode in Book 9, he immediately asked the name of Odysseus to show you that he's not very civilized, and it's not polite to start out with who you are. When Odysseus visits the Phaeacians in Book 7 and 8, it takes 2.5 books before the king asks, who are you? That's polite. So you see the contrast. Now Penelope all of a sudden says, who are you? Right off. And he says, after he tells her, lady, no mortal man on the endless earth could have cause to find fault with you, and butters her up and all, then he says eventually, but do not ask who I am, the name of my country, for fear you may increase in my heart its burden of sorrow. Don't ask me those questions. So it goes on for a bit again. And after a while, let me see, she keeps this up. She begins to tell him, before she says anything else, she begins to confide in him, which is also unusual. Why would a queen confide in a beggar and tell her innermost secrets? She's telling him about the weaving trick. She says, these suitors have been around for 3 years trying to force me to make a choice. I put them off by telling them I'm preparing a shroud for my father-in-law, and I work on it in the day, and at the night I take it apart and start out, till finally one of the maids discovers it, goes and tells the suitors, and now they demand that she no longer try this trick. And she says, I've run out of tricks. I've come to the end. I can't do this anymore. Well, why say all of these things to a beggar? As she does. I waste away at the inward heart, longing for Odysseus. These men try to hasten the marriage. I weave my own wiles. First, the divinity put the idea of the web in my mind, and she goes on to explain this. So for 3 years I was secret in my designs, convincing the Achaeans. But when the 4th year came, with the seasons returning, and the months faded, then she was found out. Now I cannot escape from this marriage. I can no longer think of another plan. She's telling this to this stranger. And then she says, but even so, tell me who you are and the place where you came from. You were not born from any fabulous oak or boulder. Nobody has able to explain that little piece, but it's a saying in classical Greece. You can't come from anything. You have to come from some place. And the expression is, are you from an oak or a boulder? Whatever they have in mind, I don't know. So, Odysseus begins. Now we're at line 165. He says, O respected wife of Odysseus, son of Laertes. That's telling also, because it's the first time that he addresses her as O respected wife of Odysseus. O Yine is the Greek term. And in a previous book, when she's talking to one of the suitors, when she's talking to Eurymachus, when she comes down from her upper floor, she says to him, I'll tell you what Odysseus told me just before he left for Troy. And he says, O Yine, O wife of Odysseus, when you see that your son sprouts a mustache, you can then marry again, because by that time I will be gone. I probably will never return. So now, it's interesting that the beggar addresses her in this way? Is it because he wants her to remember what Odysseus said as his parting words before he left for Troy? Or why would Homer set it up this way? So that's another clue that perhaps something is going on. Perhaps some kind of signs between them. When we get to book 23, and that's, you don't know it yet as readers at this point, but in book 23, around line 107, when Telemachus is upset that his mother will not embrace the beggar who has declared himself to be Odysseus, she says, "But if he is truly Odysseus and he has come home, then we shall find other ways and better to recognize each other. For we have signs that we know of between the two of us only, but they are secret from others." Well, if she says this in 23, maybe they're using those signs in 19. But we don't know that as readers. So she says, finally Odysseus says, "O respected wife of Odysseus, son of Laertes, you will not stop asking me about my origin. Then I will tell you." All right, you're forcing me to say something. So he begins. Now this is the lie. He begins to make up this lie. The lie is like all the others, he said. He's from Crete. He saw Odysseus in Crete, which is the farthest point from Ithaca that he can get. So nobody can check up on him. But he gives himself a name, which he hasn't done in any of the other lies. His name is Aethon, Aithon, which means fire, light, as if he's bringing light, understanding. So he gives a name, Aethon. He puts himself as the son of Minos, the king of Crete, the brother of one of the main warriors that went to Troy. And he says to her, "I know Odysseus because when he was ready to go to Troy, the winds blew him to Crete. And he stayed there a while till the winds receded, and he was looking for his friend Idomeneus, who is the brother of Aethon, who was the son of Minos. However, Idomeneus had already left for Troy, so he wasn't there to receive his guest Odysseus. But this pretending the beggar Aethon says, "But I invited him to my house. And I invited him, and he stayed with me for 12 days. And all his comrades, all the people with him," and you know he had many ships with him at that point, "I put them up elsewhere, and I fed them for the 12 days, and I got to know Odysseus." So he goes on. "So that's where I met Odysseus," the beggar says, "when he came to Crete, and I hosted him for 12 days. Even so," in other words, I didn't know him that well. What can I remember 20 years ago about him when I only met him for 12 days? "Even so, I will tell you what you asked me and seek for." And he goes on to tell the lie. Now we skip a bit. And Penelope finally says, she listens to this, and there's a simile that's interesting here. It says, "As snow melts in the spring, so Penelope began to thaw out." She's reserved, she's cold, but as she hears the words of this beggar, she becomes warmer. She must realize something. And she says, "I'm going to test you now to make sure that what you're telling me is really true, that you did see my husband." She says, "Now, my friend," now I'm line 215, "Now, my friend, I think I will give you a test to see if it's true that there and with his godlike companions you entertained my husband, as you say you did, in your palace. And this is what she asks. She says, tell me what sort of clothing he wore on his body. How can he remember what this stranger wore 20 years ago? But this is what she's asking. And, she says, and what of man he was himself? Give me a description, something about what he was like. And his companions. Well, the guy didn't know the companions at all. They just accompanied Odysseus. He put them up someplace. He never saw them till they left. Who followed him? Then resourceful Odysseus spoke in turn and answered her, Lady, it's difficult to tell you with so much time between. For now it's the 20th year since he was in that place and went away from my country. Just what I said. How can I tell you all these things when it's been so long ago? Then he says, still I will tell you in the way my heart imagines them. I'll tell you what I think I remember. And he begins from line 225 to 240, which is very important. He begins to describe what he remembers. Great Odysseus, he says, was wearing a woolen mantle of purple. He even remembers the color of what he was wearing. With 2 folds, but the pin to it was golden and fashioned with double sheaths, and the front part of it was artfully done. Now he's describing the button that holds the cloak together 20 years ago. And he says, but the pin to it was golden and fashioned with double sheaths, and the front part of it was artfully done. A hound held in his forepaws a dappled fawn. He remembers the picture on the button, that a hound was preying on this fawn, preying on it as it struggled, and all admired it, how though they were golden, it preyed on the fawn and strangled it, and the fawn struggled with his feet as he tried to escape him. The hound is going after the fawn, which also looks forward to what's going to happen to the suitors. It's another indication, another symbol of this. But the interesting thing is that he says he remembers exactly what was on the pin. Then he says, I notice also the shining tunic that he was wearing on his body. It was like the dried out skin of an onion, so sheer it was, and soft, and shining bright as the sun shines. And then he adds, many of the women were looking at in admiration. Maybe a little plug for himself. He's quite a guy. But put away in your heart this other thing that I tell you. I do not know if this clothing Odysseus wore had come from his home. Well, he does know it, because what he's describing, as you find out later, is exactly what Penelope gave him before he left for Troy. And that's why he's describing it. So again, it could be a signal. Now, how else would I know all of these things? So why does he have to do this at this particular moment? Because the maids are there too, remember. They're always present. But we're not told where they are. Euryclea is there, the maids are there, and she's interviewing the beggar. She would never interview a stranger on her own. It's not proper. And then he goes on. He also says, I do not know of this clothing Odysseus' word had come from his home, or if some companion gave it to him as he boarded his fast ship, or some friend abroad. Indeed, there were few Achaeans like him. And then we're told what he gave, what this man gave Odysseus. As he says, I gave him a cloak, a handsome ring. And then he goes on to say, also there was a herald, a messenger, a little older than he was, who went with him. I will describe to you what he looked like. how can he remember what the herald looked like 20 years ago? And he's going to describe him to Penelope. He says he was round in the shoulders, black complexioned, woolly haired, and had the name of Euripides. He even knows the name of the herald he just met once 20 years ago. Now, why is this important? Well, there's no mail service at this time. The only way he would have sent any kind of messages home from Troy would be through his personal messenger, who is Euripides. So it's somebody that Penelope would recognize immediately. She would know this man because she received messages for 20 years, or for many of those years, the 10 years that they were fighting in Troy. Odysseus prized him above his other companions, for their thoughts were in harmony. He spoke, and still more aroused in her the passion for weeping, as she recognized the certain proofs Odysseus had given. She recognizes these. And then she cries some. And then she said to him, "Stranger, while before this you had my pity, you now shall be my friend and be respected here in my palace. For I myself gave him this clothing, as you describe it." Well, he knows that already, but he's got to the point where now she says that. And he begins to give her other information, always addressing her, "O respected wife of Odysseus, O Yine," the way he addressed her before he left for Troy. And then he says, we go on with this. You have to read closely these lines. I'm now down to 270. He says, "For I say to you without deception, without concealment, that I have heard of the present homecoming of Odysseus. He is near in the rich land of the men of Thesprotia, and alive, and bringing many treasures back to his household." He makes a point to say, this is going to happen. Now, she's getting all this information from the beggar. She sees that there's a prophet already, Theoclemenus, that just appeared out of nowhere, that also makes these predictions very authoritatively. Odysseus is here, Theoclemenus says. He's in Ithaca right now. He will appear. And he makes the suitors more nervous when he's saying these things. And then he tells her how he knows that he's near. And he goes on to tell us another story about himself. Remember, he is a beggar. He pretends to be a beggar, but was somebody's son. He's of royalty. But he came upon bad times, and he too was sold into slavery. And he finally, when he leaves his native land, he has problems, and he ends up somewhere else where he meets a king that is willing to send him home, just like the Phaeacians sent him home. That king's name, we're told here, is Phaedon, king of Thesprotia, the Thesprotians. And he says, he told me the story that I'm telling you about the whereabouts of Odysseus, and he's almost home. The question there is, why would this king put that much confidence in this beggar to tell him everything? He told him the riches that Odysseus had with him, where they're stored, the fact that Odysseus was with this King Phaedon, but he is at the present away praying to Zeus, and he'll be back soon. The ship is ready to take him home. So the king has confided in this beggar, which makes it very unusual. So Phaedon, king of the Thesprotians, told me the story, and he swore to me in my presence, as he poured out a libation in the house, that the ship was drawn down to the sea, and the crew were ready to carry Odysseus back again to his own dear country. But before that, he sent me off for a ship of Thesprotian men, who happened to be sailing to Dulichian rich in wheat fields, and he showed me all the possessions gathered in by Odysseus. Why would the king show this beggar all the possessions that Odysseus has stored and he's ready to take? All of this is questionable, but this is part of his story. So he ends all this by saying, so he is safe, as you see, and is now coming back. He is very close at hand, and will not for long be far from his country and his own people. Zeus be my witness, first of the gods, and the table of friendship, and the hearth of blameless Odysseus, to which I come as a suppliant. All these things are being accomplished in the way I tell them. Sometime within this very year, Odysseus will be here, either at the waning of the moon or at its onset. And this now convinces Penelope even more. And she looks at him and wonders, and she keeps saying, Odysseus will never come home again. Is she saying that for the benefit of the listeners, of the maids that accompany her? And why all of a sudden, after hearing this story from him, she says, you know, I remember my husband had this thing, that he could shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. And no one else could even bend the bow. And Odysseus, and she says, I think I'm going to set up a contest. And whatever suitor does this, I'll have to marry. And Odysseus turns to her and says, do it, lady, without delay. Now the beggar is saying all this. Is this a signal again? That she realizes that she has to do something. She comes up with this. After all these years, all of a sudden she comes up with a bow contest. And he encourages her and says, yes, do it. That's exactly what you should do. And then she says, come, handmaidens, give him a wash and spread a couch for him here, with bedding and coverlets and with shining blankets. Now she wants the beggar to stay in the palace and spend the night. Before she wanted to get rid of all of them. Now all of a sudden she wants this one to remain. So he says, after some lines again, I'm going down to 345, she says, nor is there any desire in my heart for foot basins to wash my feet, nor shall any woman lay hold of my feet, not one of those such as do your work for you in your palace, not unless there is some aged and virtuous woman whose heart has had to endure as many troubles as mine has. If such a one were to touch my feet, I should not be angry. And she says, dear friend, never before has there been any man so thoughtful among those friends from far places who have come to my palace as guests. So thoughtful and so well considered is everything you say. I do have one old woman whose thoughts are prudent, who was nurse to that unhappy man. And he says, yeah, that'd be fine. I'll take her. She can wash my feet. So now it's going to come the bath. So Euryclea comes, and immediately there's all kinds of other things going on. She says, even before she approaches him, says, my, you look so much like my master. I can't believe it. And he says, you know, a lot of people have said that about me. That's right. That comes next. And then she gets a pan of water, and she begins to wash his feet, and immediately she sees the scar. And in Homer, every time something is introduced, like a scar, it has to have a story, a history. So we digress to explain the scar and also to build suspense, because as I said, she begins the bucket, the pan is dropping, And as it's dropping, we digress. And 200 lines later, it falls. So we get the story, how he got the scar as a young man, etc., etc. And we come back, finally. Okay, the old woman holding him in the palms of her hands recognized the scar as she handed it. She let his foot go so that his leg, which was in the basin, fell free, and the bronze echoed. Then we skip. We get the story. Finally, we get back to the story, and Odysseus and Euryclea is ready to scream out. Odysseus, he says, quiet, you want to kill me? Keep your mouth shut, so nobody will know who I am. She swears to do that. Now, where's Penelope? She's sitting, gazing into the fire, and we're told Athena, the goddess, averted her gaze towards the fire, which means wisdom, intelligence, turned towards the fire. The maids are right there. She certainly hears the clanging of the pan that just dropped and spilled all that water. She says nothing, like she doesn't know what's going on. But something is going on. Euryclea goes back to get a new basin of water to finish washing the feet, and she pretends she hasn't heard a thing. But now all of a sudden she says, you know, I dreamt last night of something, and I'd like you to interpret my dream. Okay, what's your dream? She says, but come, line 535. Come, listen to a dream of mine and interpret it for me. I have 20 geese here about the house, and they feed on grains of wheat from the water trough. I love to watch them. But a great eagle with crooked beak came down from the mountains and broke the necks of them all and killed them. So the whole 20 lay dead about the house, but he soared high in the bright air. Then I began to weep. That was in my dream, and I cried out aloud. And around me gathered the fair-haired Achaean women as I cried out, sorrowing for my geese killed by the eagle. That's Freudian here, I guess. Since Freud, people have interpreted all kinds of things. Are the geese the suitors, as she says they are later on? She doesn't want to see them killed. She's crying for them. What's going on deep down? So you can come up with all kinds of things. But that's not the point here. So she cried out. And as she cried out, because the geese were killed by the eagle, but he came back again and perched on the jut of the cabled roof. That's the eagle. He now had a human voice, the eagle had a human voice, and spoke aloud to me, do not fear, O daughter of far-famed Icarius. This is no dream, but a blessing, real as day. You will see it done. The geese are the suitors. Now the eagle is talking to her. She's saying that in her dream, this is what the eagle said to her. The geese are the suitors, and I, the eagle, have been a bird of portent, but now I am your own husband. Come home, and I said, inflict shameless destruction on all the suitors. Well, what is he to interpret, since he just interpreted? But this is what she's saying to him. So he spoke, and then the honey-sweet sleep released me, and I looked about and saw the geese in my palace feeding on the grain. They're still alive. Everything is fine. So he says, lady, it is impossible to read this dream and avoid it by turning another way, since Odysseus himself has told you its meaning, how it will end. The suitor's doom is evident for one and all. Not one will avoid his death and destruction. And that's when Penelope decides to talk about setting up a bow contest. When she hears this, it's like she needs assurance. she interprets her dream, say, now interpret this for me. And he says, yeah, it's exactly what's going to happen. So now she comes up with a boat contest, and she explains this, and Odysseus says, then resourceful Odysseus spoke in turn and answered her, O respected wife of Odysseus, son of Laertes, do not put off this contest in your house any longer. Do it, and do it now. And then, after all this is done, she went back up to her shining chamber, not alone, since others, her women, went to attend her. So now we find out that the women are there. So there too are listening. But they probably don't understand, because these two, as we find in Book 23, have signs between them. That ends Book 19 at that point when she goes up. Now when you start on Book 20, Book 20 begins with a long night, the dark night of the soul. They're both sleeping. Both Penelope and Odysseus are asleep. And first you see Odysseus turning and tossing and thinking, how am I going to achieve this? I have to fight 108 men. Will I be able to do it on my own? Is this possible for me to do it? And once we're finished with him, we go to Penelope, and she's turning and tossing, and she's saying, did I do the right thing? Is this contest that I've promised going to work? Am I reading the lines correct? So they're discussing the very things that they decided on. And that's what you have. Odysseus and Penelope restlessness takes a third of that book. And then you go to the preparations to see what's going on with the suitors. And again, to show the suitors in a very negative way, so that when we come to the killings, they deserve it. It just so happens that all of this is happening on the day of Apollo's holiday. Apollo is the archer god, which is also significant because the suitors are going to die with the bow and arrow. And while outside of the palace, the people are praying and giving prayers to Apollo and hecatombs. Hecatomb is sacrificing 100 animals to the god. The suitors are inside eating those animals, some of those animals. So again, shows you that they're sinning on this holiday, and they deserve what they're going to get, in spite of Emily Wilson, which some of you are reading, who thinks that Homer's a bit too rough on the maids when he hangs them at the end. Homer makes a point that they've sinned and they have to suffer in this way. So this is what's happening in 20. And this book is full of omens and strange laughter, which is also interesting. As I said, there's not much laughter in the Odyssey, but all of a sudden things become very surrealistic in 20. And you get Theoclemenos again emphasizing these things. Let me just show you a passage in Book 23:45. In the suitors, Pallas Athene stirred up uncontrollable laughter and addled their thinking. Now they laughed with jaws that were no longer their own. The meat they ate was a mess of blood. Their eyes were burning, full of tears, and their laughter sounded like lamentations. Godlike Theoclemenos now spoke out among them. Poor wretches, what evil has come on you? Your heads and faces and the knees underneath you are shrouded in night and darkness. A sound of wailing has broken out. Your cheeks are covered with tears, and the walls bleed. and the fine supporting pillars. All the forecourt is huddled with ghosts. The yard is full of them as they flock down to the underworld and the darkness. The sun has perished out of the sky, and a foul mist has come over. So he spoke, and all of them laughed happily at him. So this is the surrealistic moment. Theoclemenos now advertises the end. Athena is doing this to him. And there are other things after the staff awakes, after the dark night of the soul, which is number 1 here. Then the suitors interact with Odysseus and Telemachus to show their negative effects. The first thing they do, they remind themselves that they should have killed Telemachus, and they're still thinking of putting him out of the way because he's making them look bad, which also shows the authority that Telemachus has gained by now. Now he is almost equal to stand by his father. But one of the good suitors, who also is going to die, the one I mentioned before, Amphimenos, said the signs are that we shouldn't do much with Telemachus. The signs are not favorable to us. And the signs are that Zeus thunders, which means something to him, and one of the maids, the mill lady that grinds wheat, there are 3 of them, one of them, who is still working, tells us how her knees and her back has been broken all of these years grinding wheat, and how she hopes that the end of the suitors will come. So you have an external sign and you have an internal sign of the end. So you get all of these forebodings and signs that are going to happen. You get Apollo's festival that they're not keeping, that they're not aware of, that they should be. You get another suitor, his name is Ctesippus, that I mentioned, who in his frustration throws an ox hoof at Odysseus, at the beggar, and misses. So that's the 3rd time somebody throws a missile towards him. Yet another suitor by the name of Agelos tries to calm things up and to force Penelope to select somebody, because they will not leave till she marries somebody. And then you have Theoclemenos again, prophesizing doom for everybody. And you have Penelope now listening. She comes out of her chamber and she eavesdrops. She listens very closely to what's going on below. So she knows something is going on. And that's at the point that 20 ends. So it seems that Penelope is aware now of her husband. Telemachus already knows it's his father because he's been told so by his father. Eumaeus has been suspecting the beggar ever since book 14 because of the way he speaks, the way he philosophizes, the fact that he knows all of these things at the very beginning of book 13 and 14. When we first meet Eumaeus, he absolutely resists the beggar and knows for a fact, as far as he's concerned, that Odysseus is dead. By the time they go to the palace in book 17, he's changed his mind. And he tries to change the mind of Penelope, that you better listen to this guy, because we don't know who he is, but he is not what he says he is. So every sign points to the fact that Odysseus is known. Now, in the next set books, the last books, the question becomes, for readers, why does Penelope resist her husband if she knows him? And that's been a question that's been written a lot. Why does she still have to test him at the very end with the bed trick, as you'll find out? And the best answer is probably that she's not saying she doesn't recognize him. What she is saying is the Odysseus before me the Odysseus that left me? Is he the same man, the same kind of man? Or have 20 years and 10 years of war changed him? There's a psychologist in Boston, Jonathan Shea, that has written Odysseus in America, where he uses the Odyssey to show what the returning Vietnam veterans suffer. And he takes it from Homer and the Odyssey to show that what happens when people come back from a prolonged war. He also wrote a book called Achilles in Vietnam, which talks about what a warrior feels in battle and the kind of problems that he comes across in dealing with Vietnam veterans, which applies to what I'm saying here. So that's what Penelope is interested at the end. Is he the same man that left me, or has he changed? And she thinks the bed trick, saying, go and move my bed out here so I can change the furniture around. She knows that nobody has been in that bedroom but herself and the maid that makes up the bed, who has since retired. Her name is Actorus. So nobody else knows, not even the gods, if it was a god that came to her in secret to lay with her. So when Odysseus says, who moved my bed that was made out of a stump of a tree? I build the whole palace around this thing. It can't be moved. She knows, it is Odysseus, because no one would know, since she knows who's been in that bedroom or not. And you notice that that bedroom has been closed ever since Odysseus left for Troy. She sleeps upstairs, whereas this bed, we're told later in the books, is downstairs. So that's what we have. And that brings me, I think, yes, to the end. That's by Theophilus too. This is his rendition of the Trojan horse. He's a primitivist. So, any questions? Yes?
I have questions about the female slaves.
Yes.
We're not told the names of the slaves that accompany Penelope.
We are. The two women that accompany her have names. I just don't have them in mind right
And
now.
are they, in the later books, are they ones who have been loyal to Penelope, or are they among those who were
No,
slipping
they're the
off?
loyal ones. The only unloyal one that's mentioned is Melantho, who is the sister of Melanthius.
So, but we don't know the names of the...
No,
just
the
loyal.
others we don't know. We're only told, actually in these books, we're told that when Odysseus wants to remain in the palace so that he can have an audience with the queen, he says to the maids, Melantho, I'll tend the fires and the lights, because the maids are there to make sure that the fire stays on and all. And they laugh at him and make fun. And then they all leave to go visit the suitors that they're associated with. And he keeps that in mind and says, I'll take care of you later on. And at one point, Euryclea says, after she recognizes the scar, she says, I will tell you the name of the maids that have been unfaithful to you. And he says at that time, he says, don't bother, I'll find out myself. But later, in the next set of books, he takes her up on it and has her identify the 12 maids. And he says, take them out and get rid of them. And it's Telemachus that wants to do more harm to them and hangs them.
So if Penelope had selected one of the suitors, if things had gone the wrong way in terms of the Odyssey, would the slave women remain with Penelope, or would they disperse among the suitors? Would that...
I don't know. She would have certain people that would follow her because she says, this person has been with me all my life or was granted to me by my father, etc. So there were certain women that would follow her, but the probably palace slaves, who knows?
So the disloyal ones may have been setting up liaisons for their future if Odysseus didn't
Could be.
return.
Yeah,
They would have a place to go.
yeah, but that's, that's not in Homer.
No.
It's like saying, some students used to ask, what would happen if Oedipus had not married his mother? Well, who knows? The story is that he did marry her. That's how Sophocles put it. And that's the story.
Why does the descriptive term shining show up so often? Shining this, shining clothing, shining. How could it shine?
Bright, maybe. In these books,
The word is
in these
shining.
books,
Yes.
it emphasizes some kind of light. They keep saying, one of them, I'm trying to think who says this, who's going to light your way? Or maybe Telemachus asks, and Odysseus says, don't worry about that. The god will take care of it. And actually Athena leads them, and there's this light about her. And also when I mentioned that the beggar's name in this particular lie is Athen, which is fire and light, it shows you that there's enlightenment. He shines in that way, brilliance. So I take it to be something like that. Anything else? Oh, right on the right. Yes.
At one point, the cattle of the sun are described as immortal.
The who?
The cattle of the sun.
Oh,
And
Yeah.
that has troubled me because I thought, how could they be killed if they are immortal?
well, the thing is they're killed, but even while they're eating them, they're moving. They're making sounds. And there are.
So they are immortal, even though, and the sin is that they were killed, but then they're immortal, so they live on in some way.
At one point it says they're immortal, they never die, but you're right, that the suitors eat them, and while they're eating them, it becomes very surrealistic. They're making noise and all these signs. So maybe they'll be brought back to life, who knows? He doesn't say that. And there are many things like that Homer just passes over. It doesn't really matter. He makes his point, but we can find a lot of places where you say, for example, at one place that just comes to mind about the weapons, which we said here in Book 19 are taken off the wall. And Odysseus says, now make sure you keep a spear and a shield for you and me. Earlier, in another book, much earlier, he mentions what should be kept out for them. But when it comes to the actual killing of the suitors, when Eumaeus and the other ox herd joined, Philoetius, there's Odysseus, Telemachus, and the two herdsmen. There are four of them. Then they go to the storeroom and they get 4 sets of everything. But that's not what they said earlier. And there are all these discrepancies, but that's oral literature. It doesn't really matter. Yes, David?
Do you think there's any relationship between the numbers that you talk about, like 3 and 12?
Yes.
Coming into the Old Testament and then into the New Testament?
Probably.
Like the 3 wise men?
Yeah, the 3,
or the
10,
12
the 12
tribes of...
the 40, those are numbers that are constantly mentioned. And there's probably is some, you can make some kind of thing with that. I mean, the Old Testament was written not too far distant from the Homeric epics.
Right.
There's a scholar at Princeton, let me see if I can remember his name. He has 2 or 3 books, and I can't remember now. He's in the School of Theology, and he has written on Homer, where he compares especially the book of Luke in the New Testament to the Odyssey, and makes a point, a good case, that the book of Luke was patterned after the Odyssey.
Yeah.
When it was, and makes all kinds of comments on that. And he has several books that take different parts of the Bible to show that there's a connection.
And the killing of the suitors, and then the killing of the men who were circumcised, and they killed all of them.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Well, even when you take a story like the flood, to get rid of all the bad people and to have Noah make an ark where he puts everything.
Right.
You have the same kind of thing in Homer, except in the Iliad, one story goes that Zeus decided to have a war, the Trojan War, to get rid of the overpopulation and keep the good people. So it's sort of the same story reinterpreted in different ways.
So you have a flood.
So many of those things are the same.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does the number 40 do anything in?
Yeah. It's significant. It's a number that appears all the time. The 3, the 40. And with the 3, which is interesting, Homer in both epics feels that only the 3 generations count. After that, it doesn't. That is, Odysseus has a father and a son. Those are the 3 generations that make sense. Now, why that? Well, in Greek religion, there are 3 generations of gods. You start with Uranos and Ea, earth and sky. You go to Kronos, the father of Zeus and Rhea, and then you go to Zeus and his company. 3 generations. It never changes from that. He is the last generation of gods. So maybe the 3 is significant to them because of that. So every time he mentions people, it's the 3 generations that he always mentions. This person, the son of somebody, and his own family. Beyond that, doesn't really matter so much. And if you think about it, I think about it sometimes, it's the case if you have grandchildren, pretty much it stops with your grandchildren. Once you get your great-grandchildren, then things change a little bit. It's the great-grandchildren, the grandchild, and the father. Grandfather, father, and grandchild. You're kind of pushed out of the picture a little bit after that generation. So maybe Homer is right. I think. I have grandchildren.
Don't tell my grandchildren that.
Not your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh.
Don't tell my grandchildren.
Yeah.
The next session,
that they
which
don't.
is the last session, is on May 4th. And same time, same place.
Well, this was the most fascinating.